Eeb, are you okay? It sounded like you were talking about handhelds and then just froze. So you're not responding, huh? Well, why don't you look at the 3DS then? Maybe that will help. I remember. I was gonna look at the rest of the Dragon Ball Handheld games. So all that drama just for that? Just for? Do you know when the last time we looked at the last set of Dragon Ball games was? No, it's been about 8 months. Oh. Wait, 8 months? I know. So that's why I want to look at the rest of them now. Well, this time I don't care. So I'm gonna leave. Yeah, what? Yeah, I guess you didn't even need to be here to begin with.
So last time, I went over all the Dragon Ball games from the Game Boy all the way to the Game Boy Advance. The last game I talked about was Dragon Ball GT Transformation. So for this time, I want to go over the rest of the Dragon Ball Handheld games. I'll start from the DS and end with the Switch. The PSP and Vita are also here. Although the Switch isn't listed as a handheld console in the Dragon Ball Wiki, I'll count it since it does have exclusive games on it. So the first game for today is Dragon Ball Z Supersonic Warriors 2. The first game was on the GBA. This game came out in 2005 and was made by none other than Arc System Works. Cavio is there too. The game looks better than its prequel, with this time, the game has 3D backgrounds. It runs better than the last game too, with it looking more fluid. This is a team-based fighting game where you can have a team consisting of up to 3 characters. You'd unlock the characters by playing through the modes the game has to offer. There are actually quite a few modes in the game that allow you to fight instead of just miscellaneous modes. Sparking Zero. The character roster was also pretty full of characters too, with some support characters. It seems like a good time overall. The OST is also pretty good, with it having that nostalgic DS vibe to it. Actually, I can't help but think of this OST having a more arcade feel to it. Not a bad game, and I'm sure many people have fond memories of it. The next game came out in 2007 and it's a card game called Dragon Ball Z Harukanaru Densetsu. I'm not fond of card games in general, but this isn't your normal card game. Dragon Ball card games make it so that your moves are based on the cards you choose. So think of something like Paper Mario Sticker Star or something. It's still not for me, but I wouldn't doubt it if there were people who like this type of game. The game goes through everything from the Saiyan saga all the way until the Cell saga. It was actually going on par with what Kai had to offer at the time. You're pretty much on this board getting from one point to another and occasionally fighting the enemies that are on the board. What is it with Dragon Ball games and you having to navigate through a board? The OST isn't anything special. If anything, it sounds more like a GBA game than a DS game. Overall, this game existed, but why would you get this when Tenkaichi 3 came out the same year? Now the next game is quite a unique Dragon Ball game overall. For one, it's a game based on OG Dragon Ball. You would think the series would have more of these types of games, but the reality is Dragon Ball Z is what makes the most money. Anyways, this is Dragon Ball Origins. It came out in 2008 and the first thing you may notice is this game is an actual 3D game on a DS. 3D games on DS actually feels a lot more rare than you think, since if the game wasn't made by Nintendo themselves, the game would most likely be in 2D. This game starts from the very start of Dragon Ball and goes all the way until the first World Martial Arts Tournament. The biggest difference with this game is how you actually play it. A majority of the functions you do would require the touchscreen. The OST actually reminded me of an RPG. Overall, the game looks pretty good. It may look like I'm rushing, and yeah, I am. There are just way too many games I have to go through. Here we are, the only handheld Dragon Ball game I own. Dragon Ball Z Attack of the Saiyans is an RPG that came out in 2009. You'll never believe this, but this game was made by the same people who made Xenoblade Chronicles. The game goes through only 2 sagas in Dragon Ball, the Piccolo Jr. saga and the Saiyan saga. The exploration this world gives you is pretty interesting. Although those 2 arcs don't have many locations you would have to go through, this game just puts in so many locations. They wouldn't be related to the sagas included, but it's more to extend the length of the game. The combat is pretty cool too. Although a turn-based RPG, it makes ki and melee attack feel normal in this format. It seems like there was gonna be a sequel to this game, but that never happened. I wonder why. The OST was nothing memorable, but it wasn't bad. A pretty solid game overall. After that game was Dragon Ball Origins 2. It came out in 2010 and really, there's nothing noteworthy to say about it. It's pretty much the same game as this time, it goes through the Red Ribbon Army saga. Again, a pretty solid game. The OST is also pretty similar to the prequel. Sadly, this was the last game in the series, so no King Piccolo saga or second martial arts saga. Looking at this next game, I'm pretty blown away. This is Dragon Ball Kai, Ultimate Butoden. It only came out for Japan in 2011 and is part of the Butoden series. This is an actual 3D Dragon Ball fighting game on the DS. It plays pretty similarly to the Butoden games, which is pretty crazy. How are you even supposed to play this on the DS? The game actually looks really good with its fast-paced gameplay and the graphics looking very fitting too. The craziest part about this game is you can play as King Kai. Yes, you've heard that right. What other game even allows you to play as him of all characters? I'm not gonna lie, this might actually be one of the best Dragon Ball games I've ever seen. Since I'm in Japan, if I get the chance, I'll try to find this game and get it. The game's OST is also pretty alright. Overall, a game that was beyond my expectations. By the way, this game had that one commercial with Goku and Cell playing on the DS. Finally, we move on to the PSP. This is a much more powerful handheld compared to the DS, and the games that came out for it are pretty different. The first game to come out for this console is Dragon Ball Z Shin Budokai. It came out in 2006 and was developed by DIMPS. This is part of the Budokai series. And interestingly, this game is also called Shin Budokai in Japan. The reason I mention that is because in Japan, the Budokai series was simply called Dragon Ball Z, and then a number after it. The game plays literally like the Budokai series, just on a PSP. It doesn't look bad graphics wise. If anything, it's more like a lower poly Budokai game on a smaller screen. There's a pretty good selection of modes in this game, and the story mode goes through an original story for this game. It's pretty cool. You may know that the Budokai games had plagiarized music, but this game's an exception, at least for the original songs. There are actually reused songs from the older games, which, well, yeah. Anyways, a pretty solid start to this new handheld. The next game is the sequel to Shin Budokai called Dragon Ball Z Shin Budokai Another Road. It came out in 2007 and is pretty much the same as the previous game. There are more characters in this game with also improved mechanics. The story in this game is also original, with it taking place in future Trunks' timeline. Once again, there are new songs, and songs taken from Budokai. Overall, I mean, it is Shin Budokai. The next one is a game people probably don't know exist. This is Dragon Ball Evolution, the game, and it came out in 2009. You wanna know the craziest part of this game? It's part of the Budokai series. I'm sure when people ask for Budokai 4, this isn't what they had in mind. Funnily enough, this plays just like Budokai. The key difference being these aren't your average Dragon Ball characters. The movesets are meant to fit the movie characters, I think. But I guess it gives you a new experience from what we are all used to at this point. I'm just going to come out and say it, but this game is pretty ugly. And when I say that, I mean, if you look at this game, will the first thing that comes to your mind be Dragon Ball? Obviously, it's trying to look more like the movie than anything, and it does a pretty good job in doing that. But as a Dragon Ball game, this does not look like the series at all. At least there's original music this time, right? By the way, this game has to have like the worst ratings I've ever seen for a Dragon Ball game. If you've ever played this game, can you confirm whether or not it was this bad? And now we reach a game I actually played and it's pretty good. This is also the last PSP Dragon Ball game. Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi Tag Team came out in 2010 and counts as part of the Budokai Tenkaichi series. The game also plays pretty much the same as Budokai Tenkaichi. You have pretty much the same combos, the same mechanics with sparking and all, and so on and so forth. But the one thing that makes this game unique is the fact that this is a 2v2 arena fighter. And when I say 2v2, I mean both characters are fighting two other characters at the same time. It's more like Xenoverse with Budokai Tenkaichi mechanics. It's a really cool game. There is the story mode which takes you through the Saiyan saga all the way to the Buu saga. You know, the same old same old. There's also a survival mode for you to try and defeat 100 characters. The music for this game is pretty good. It feels more like Budokai Tenkaichi than Raging Blast. In fact, I think it actually sounds more like Ultimate Tenkaichi. And with that, that's all the PSP Dragon Ball games. From the 3DS onwards, there started to be less handheld Dragon Ball games. Don't get me wrong though, of the next 3 consoles I'll go over, the 3DS had the most. So for the 3DS's first game came Dragon Ball Heroes Ultimate Battle Mission. Dragon Ball Heroes is an arcade game that you use real cards to play, but this game was the first of many ports of this series added to the 3DS. It's made by DIMS and came out in 2013, but only for Japan. I'm not very big on Dragon Ball Heroes, but I do think the non-canon characters and transformations are pretty cool. Before Battle of Gods, this was pretty much the only Dragon Ball content we had for many years, so people enjoyed it somewhat. This is more of a strategy game, and you're pretty much moving your characters around on a panel to decide your action. It's pretty cool for the people who are into this type of game. The OST is pretty alright, but I don't really have much to add on to this. The year after, Dragon Ball Heroes Ultimate Mission 2 came out. Again, this was a Japan exclusive game. This is just another port of the arcade game with even more characters in the next part to the story. Nothing really changed, so I don't have to spend too much time on this one. Dragon Ball Z Extreme Butoden was the next game to come out for 3DS. This was developed by both Bandai and Arc System. This was the game they both worked on before Fighters. For a fighting game on the 3DS, this looks really good. I mean that both graphically and gameplay wise. The game is a team-based fighting game with supporters as well. I find this game very interesting given the fact that this game actually features so many characters, albeit most of them are just assists. But you have characters that even showed up in Dragon Ball Heroes. Although at this point in time Dragon Ball was back with Super, it seems like the Dragon Ball Heroes influence wasn't completely shunned. The game is a lot slower than Fighters, which does kind of suck, but I don't think a fast-paced fighting game would work so well on a 3DS. Just look at Smash for example. There's a good amount of modes in this game and a good amount of stages you can play on. Take note, Sparking Zero. I think the craziest part of this game is the fact that you have the ability to cross-play with another 3DS fighting game but for One Piece called One Piece Great Pirate Coliseum. Sadly, that game only came out in Japan, so anyone in the West will never truly be able to experience that feature. Well, I guess now you can't at all anyways since the 3DS servers are down. The music in this game is pretty close to Fighters and is pretty good. Overall, a really cool game. The game after has to be the strangest one yet. For the most part, all Dragon Ball games I've covered more or less stay in line with Dragon Ball stuff. Sure, Heroes adds some what-if transformation and stuff, but this game takes what-if transformations to a whole new level. Dragon Ball Fusions came out in 2016 and to be honest, I never really hear anyone talk about this game. I don't know much about the game myself and have only ever seen one of those all fusion videos for it. So the game plays. Wait, the wiki page literally doesn't show anything for gameplay. And from what I see, the game is pretty much a strategy game, and I guess that's all you really need to know. Now the craziest part about the game is the fusions, and that's really all the game is known for if anything. I guess it lives up to its name, but at what cost? The game does have an original story, but it's too long to cover here. As for its OST, it's okay. It has a more adventure-esque feel to it, but it still fits a Dragon Ball game, which is nice to hear. Overall, I don't know if I'd ever play this game, but it's not out of the question. There's still one more game for the 3DS, and it's Dragon Ball Heroes Ultimate Mission X. The game came out in 2017 for Japan, and that's all you really need to know. What haven't I said about the last 2 games that I need to say for this one? So I'm going to move on. Now the PS Vita actually had a Dragon Ball game on it, but it wasn't as unique of a game as you would expect. It's Dragon Ball Z Battle of Z. I actually didn't even know this game had a port for the Vita, but here we are. If you want to see what I've already said about this game, check out my worst Dragon Ball game era video. It's not actually the worst era, I just wanted to name it that. All I can say about the PS Vita version is it definitely works. There's also a mini-map, which I don't remember ever seeing on the PS3 version. I think this game fits a lot more for the Vita than it does for home consoles. with the way it plays and all. So the Switch kind of counts as a handheld. I mean, if you get a Switch Lite, it's literally just a handheld console. But in terms of Dragon Ball games, it shares many of the PS4 and Xbox One games. It did get a special version of Xenoverse 2 with the Xenoverse 1 story and stuff, but that's not the reason I included this console. The game exclusive to the Switch is none other than Super Dragon Ball Heroes World Missions. This isn't even exclusive, it's even on Steam. For the first time ever, a Dragon Ball Heroes game came out for the West. And well, it was pretty short-lived given that Dragon Ball Heroes is now done with. It came out in 2019, and believe it or not, this isn't just an arcade port. It does include everything that the new arcade version of Dragon Ball Heroes, Super Dragon Ball Heroes, has, with a unique story also being there. But that's all I'm going to say, because at the end, it's just Dragon Ball Heroes with even more characters. The graphics aren't even that different from the past games. Now there are quite a few games I left out, but I only did that because they're all jump games or they include Dragon Ball. So although there is Dragon Ball representation in them, it isn't mainly focused on Dragon Ball enough to be called a Dragon Ball game. But just like my other videos, I'm going to quickly go over them in the order they came out. Jump Superstars is a DS game that came out in 2005 only in Japan. It's a party type fighting game that's better than any other Smash copy that exists nowadays. If Jump Comics just wanted to make an actual good Jump game, they really should just stick with this style. I think it's the best way to represent all their series. Jump Ultimate Stars is next, and it's also for the DS. It came out in 2006 and only for Japan again. It's pretty much the same as the last game but with even more characters. No more needed to be said there. Dr. Slump's Aurelie-chan is clearly not a Dragon Ball game, but it does have Goku in it. It is also in the Dragon Ball Wiki, so I decided to include it. This game came out in 2008 for the DS, and it's a Japan exclusive. I really don't know what this game was meant to be, but all you're really doing is going around Penguin Village and doing missions in the form of mini games. The next game is J Legend Retsuden for the 3DS. It came out only in Japan and is a compilation of jump games from the NES and the SNES. It has quite a few Dragon Ball games like Dragon Ball Shenron no Nazo, which is the first Dragon Ball game, and Super Butoden 2 just to name a few. On the PS Vita, J-Star's Victory Versus came out. This was a worldwide game, but it initially came out in 2014. It also came out on the PS3 and I did talk a bit about it in my worst Dragon Ball game era video. But basically, the game is pretty much Jump Force but looks better. And for the last game of today, it's none other than Jump Force. I literally just mentioned it. It came out on the Switch later than the other consoles in 2020. It even came out on my birthday. I don't know if that's a good thing though. You should know about this game by this point, but it's pretty much an arena fighter that crosses over many characters from Jump Comics. It's cool, but just not good looking. The game also recently shut down for a more recent Spike Chunsoft project. And that's pretty much all the Dragon Ball handheld games. There are just so many that the odds of me playing all of them are very unlikely, but not impossible. But there are a few that are really cool and I would like to play them at some point.
So that's how it is, huh? Huh? What the? When did you? I thought you weren't gonna listen. Well, after I left, I realized I had nowhere to go, so I just came back. Then why didn't you say anything? Because I thought you knew. Well, anyways, what do you think about this set of Dragon Ball games? They're pretty cool, I guess. But you know you're not actually going to go out of your way to get these games, even though you live in Japan, a country that has pretty much all these games. You don't know that.